Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to move into the second half of our accelerator program content. So the first half of the accelerator program content, we're talking about what I would call product market fit, or the company and product side of the business. Now we're going to, for the rest of the program, we're going to talk about the financing and fundraising, or the company as an investment. So this is really important next couple of weeks, because I think based on the presentations we saw last time, we're doing okay on putting together the value proposition, innovation, market, strategy, etc. But now we really have to start thinking about the deal. So the deal that we're going to be offering to investors, and what the company as an investment is going to look like. So I'll cover a couple of topics today. I'm starting with revenue model. So revenue model is about how does the company generate revenue, as you can probably guess from the name revenue model. And this, of course, is extremely important for any company which has a business model that is based on revenue. And there's also, in revenue model, tremendous scope for innovation. So when we look at a lot of the most innovative business models in the last few years, many of these innovative business models begin with new revenue models. And I think there's a pretty consistent theme in the directionality in the innovation in revenue models, which we'll look at whether we can apply to our business. So I like to think about, as an example of innovation in revenue models, we can look at the software business. Did we talk about this already? So let's say you look at the beginning of the software business 20 years ago. What was the revenue model like? How did software companies generate revenue?
Selling CDs, so licenses.
Yeah, okay, let's look at consumer software first. So they sold we could call shrink wrap software. So they would create a piece of software. They would put that software onto a floppy disk, or later a CD. They would put that floppy disk or CD in a box. They would with a printed manual and cover it with plastic, and ship that box to a warehouse, and then the box would sit in the warehouse until it went to a distributor, who took it to a retail outlet where consumers would walk around and buy boxes of software. So this original software revenue model, so it seems like 100 years ago, but actually it's not that long. So what was the next evolution in software revenue model?
Is the website, is the account, usage model, right? The next model for software.
So I would say the next model was very similar to the first model, but downloadable software. So instead of going to the store to buy software in a box, I would download the software onto my computer from internet.
Would that be more on the distribution side of it than the revenue model?
Yeah, so actually it's a good point, right? It doesn't really change the revenue that much, but it does dramatically affect the cost side of the business model. So fundamental business model has two components: the revenue model and the cost model. If we look at this first step in the evolution of software distribution and pricing, so we're still selling one unit at a time, but we have dramatically reduced the cost, because now we don't have to put the software on a disk, we don't have to put the disk in a box, we don't have to send a box to a warehouse, and we don't have to distribute the box to the retailer, we don't have to take returns on the boxes that don't sell. but you're right that the revenue model doesn't change much. We still sell like one unit of software at a time. Then, what's the next evolution of software revenue model?
Is usage, based on the usage of the customer, like cloud computing, like how many accounts or how many resources is next model, right?
So yeah. So let's say for consumer-facing software, like how does that model work?
Is pay as you go. Yeah, anything is for.
You buy subscription.
Subscription. So next version is subscription, where now we have software as a service that runs on the website and that runs online, and the consumers subscribe and they run the software. Maybe the software downloads to the computer, or maybe they just run it straight off the internet, but they don't have to actually purchase a unit of software. Instead, they subscribe to the software. Now, is this what are the advantages of this model? Why would a subscription model, or you think which is better, a subscription model or a unit model?
Subscription model.
Subscription model. By a lot, right?
Yeah.
Oh, somebody's joined us. Where are they?
Oh,
we needed solutions.
Reading.
Oh, Greetings, We Did It Solutions. Can you hear me?
Amen.
Hello?
Isn't that Caroline?
Yeah, I think it's Caroline. Maybe they went to the wrong location. Hello? Can you hear us?
You can type and see.
Oh, but yeah,
That's Caroline.
Who's that?
No, he's not muted.
Yeah.
Is this Caroline? Yeah, that's Caroline. Maybe some other lady that looks like that.
Okay, so We Did It Solutions, can you hear us?
No.
Just wanted to make mute.
You're trying to mute?
I'm trying to mute myself, but we can hear you now. Yes.
I can mute you. Wait, is that Caroline? Is Caroline there with you?
Okay, so we're
Okay. He doesn't want to answer that. All right. So, okay, so, yeah, so why is this model so much better? What's better about this subscription model than about our unit model?
Yeah.
For the consumer, it breaks down the payment. It's easier for them to pay. For the company, it can fuel their iteration of version. They can make it better and better, add new features, and basically still keep the cost the same.
Okay, and what's the other tremendous advantage that we get as a company?
Cash advance. Cash advance. The subscription.
So yeah, so it can help the cash flow, and what else?
Sometimes they forget about canceling.
Yeah, okay, that's good. But there's one advantage that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is maybe one of the most important. What's our for most of our businesses and for most like the type of businesses that we work with, what's the single biggest cost?
Centralized, like
Eventually.
salary, the cost.
Our costs. What's our single biggest expense item for most of our companies?
Salary, right? No?
I mean,
Sales?
in a way, but
Distribution? I mean, Walmart can take
customer acquisition. Customer acquisition. So usually our biggest cost item for most of the types of businesses that we do is customer acquisition. And what's the most important metric that we looked at before when we think about the fundamental economics of the business is what?
CEVA.
Customer lifetime value has to exceed customer acquisition costs.
Mhm.
So how does a subscription model relate to that?
Reduce the cost.
I mean, it may not reduce, it might reduce costs.
Self-service. The self-service.
Increase the CLVs.
Yeah, because we create recurring revenue from every customer. So instead of like spending a lot of money to acquire a customer, we go sell him a box of software. Maybe when that software is out of date, maybe he buys another box from us again, or maybe he doesn't. But now we sell a customer subscription. So let's assume we spend the exact same amount on acquisition cost, but now this customer can be a customer forever. Right? They're paying us every month instead of paying us one time and walking away. So when we generate, now of course the one-time sale would be priced higher than the recurring sale, but still, when we sell a product that generates recurring revenue, this dramatically improves our customer lifetime value versus customer acquisition cost equation. And this is why you see everybody almost every segment that can do this is moving towards subscription model, because one-time revenues and recurring revenues are not equally attractive in your business. Recurring revenues are much preferred over one-time revenue. So, and for some of the reasons you mentioned, and also for this basic driver of amortizing our customer acquisition cost over many, many more sales to that customer. Now, the subscription model also creates another amazing opportunity to drive customer adoption, which is what? Like, okay, what is the most, I think we talked about this already, so it's okay, just answer. Like, what's the most profitable product in the history of Microsoft?
Windows.
No. Office. Okay, Windows are not close, but let's say Office. And then, and now Microsoft Office on the mobile is priced at what? Free. So Microsoft has taken the most profitable product in history and now gives it away for free. It's crazy. Are they stupid?
It's okay.
What's that?
I think it's because they bought other services because of the free.
Yeah, so when we move to this type of subscription revenue model, now we have lots of opportunity for creative pricing. Like, we can offer a free version of a product and then several levels of paid version. So this also helps us drive customer acquisition, because getting people to try free product is a lot easier than selling the products that are paid for. So in our subscription model, we can have multiple tiers, which a lot of subscription models do, and then we can help to upsell try to upsell customers more expensive versions of the product. Another very interesting recurring revenue model that we can look at is this razor and blade model, which I think we might have talked about this before also. Gillette sells razor handles one time and then sells recurring blade. If you can shift your revenue from one time to recurring, it's a very positive direction for your revenue model. So I would like everybody to think about what are the various revenue model innovations that we can incorporate in our product. Another very common direction that I see in our revenue models, companies that, like one of our companies is in the payment business, software for payment. And originally, back in the old days, when they sold to corporate customers, they could sell software license with maintenance and upgrade. They're very traditional B2B revenue model. But several, many years ago, or quite a few years ago now, they moved away from that and they moved toward fee per transaction. So instead of traditional revenue model, toward a transaction fee-based revenue model. Why?
Transaction?
Meaning it's payment processing software. So instead of charging for the software once, they just take a percentage of each transaction that's processed.
Makes more sense.
Update.
Recurring versus one-time revenue. I sell software license, it's one time. Maybe there's a maintenance fee, and that's a very small fraction of the total cost. So again, when I move to transaction-based, now it's recurring revenue. And also, there's much more potential upside. If the transaction volume increases a lot, I can make a lot more money. And in the past, if you sold the software with a license and transaction volume increased a lot, you as the software vendor did not benefit from that. So, yeah, think quite about a revenue model. Don't just adopt the most basic or simple revenue model. Think about which revenue model leads to the best version of your customer acquisition cost versus customer lifetime value equation. I'm not going to go through all these, but customer level. Okay. So, okay, I want to talk a little bit about the team now, because I think I probably also mentioned in previous class that I'm a very strong believer in the team is the most important thing in the startup. And that team beats product market fit every time, and that we need to have the strongest possible team in order to both execute successfully a business plan and also raise money to do that. So when you think about a team, I think you want to have the strongest possible management team, but you, especially as an early stage startup that has a limitation on how big the management team can grow, you also want to think about how do we strengthen our team beyond just the management team. So who are the advisors we can put in the team? Who are strategic partners that can be part of our team, et cetera. So oftentimes you'll have, as an early stage startup, you'll have noticeable gaps in the team. Like, for example, how many of our companies have a CFO? Chief Financial Officer.
We have.
Mm-hmm.
You mean which?
Yeah.
CFO?
Yeah.
How about also CEOs? We use an audit company.
Yeah, so auditor is not a CFO, right? And your accountant is also not a CFO, and your bookkeeper is also not a CFO. Mm-hmm. So all these, I'm not saying you should have a CFO. Most startups at this stage don't have a CFO.
Yeah.
But yeah, what does the CFO do?
So they plan the position, the financial plan for every month, quarter, and yearly, and what money they need to raise from for example, from the investors or from the team, and to prepare the best finance. Because sometimes we don't have to invest the money for 5 years. Every year we raise every time like this.
I don't think so, because with the startup, normally we have the money from the family, also from the friends, shareholder each other. So normally the CEO or the CFO, because the cash flow of the project is already happening.
It doesn't matter who do it, but the role of the financial.
I know the role.
So CFO.
I think you're both right. Yeah. At the beginning, the CEO also is going to be CFO, because we don't have enough funding usually to get a separate CFO. Mm-hmm. But
for long term,
as the company grows, we definitely need to get a CFO.
Yes.
And because the CFO, okay, the way I think about it the CFO is responsible for the company's funding and financial plan, not just the budget, not just the projections, but they should be figuring out how to structure and grow the company financially so that this company can be a successful investment.
Yeah.
And especially if the company has complex operations or operations in more than one country, etc., CFO is going to become really important. Like when you're going to really miss having a CFO is the first time you do a real venture capital investment round, and you realize that in the due diligence that you're missing everything that you need to close the deal. So you don't have the right structure, you don't have the right records, you don't have the right level of information, you don't have the right contracts, you don't have the right agreements, everything is wrong, and therefore your due diligence either takes a really long time or the valuation of the company goes way down during the due diligence because the investor says this is a mess. And this happens to a lot of startups. It's not unusual, and that's when you usually figure out you're going to hire a real CFO. And especially if you want to get to exit, the CFO is going to be critical in getting you to that exit. But we won't have a CFO at the beginning, so what can we do? Maybe we have somebody on our advisory board who can help with some aspects of the CFO role. So that's where I think advisory boards can be very useful for, especially early stage startups, to help fill gaps in the team, reasonable gaps in the team. Now, so let's say on our team, let's say a seed stage startup, which positions absolutely have to be filled if we want to raise money? We have to have a CEO.
Yes.
Believe it or not, sometimes I talk to startups who don't have a CEO. Yeah, they like 2 or 3 founders, and they'll say, we're all equal. There's nobody who's CEO. Meaning, in a way, I think they're trying to suggest like they don't want to have too many levels. So, and therefore nobody is above anybody else. So this is a total non-starter. Yeah, you cannot do it like this. So I usually will say right away, oh, so thanks. I'm happy to hear that, which means you don't need investment or don't want investment, right? Because no investor is going to put money in a company without a CEO. Why? The analogy I like to use is the company is like a bus. The CEO, the company, all the people in the company are riding on this bus. And this bus is like, it's on one of those roads from the National Geographic or Discovery Channel, World's Most Dangerous Roads, and the CEO is supposed to be driving the bus. But if we're an investor getting on that bus and no driver, then it's crazy. It's already crazy to be on that bus, and then on that bus with no driver, forget it.
But the question is about the CEO is goes there, and the share of the CEO is the smallest part of the total, and the marketing, the CMO, who has the biggest share, and everybody in the company is like listen to him, the CEO.
So this is also
from the beginning we start like that.
This is also so we need to have a CEO, and the CEO has to have the largest equity stake. Those are 2 must be. If it's not like that, then finished.
So, but as I said, that's the structure for the company. The CEO in that he just have in terms of the legal rights through the government only, but actually is in another one. So.
Oh, you mean it's like some special
person who stand for the legal?
I mean, I think somebody like that, they should be chairman. They should be president or chairman or something other than CEO. Okay. Because in our business, CEO has a very specific meaning. So, I wouldn't get too stuck on the name. let's say if they have to say CEO because of some legal thing, whatever. But then in our view, then the CMO would really be the CEO. So of course, we also don't like to see funny structures. You know what I mean? Another problem, another thing that turns investors off is funny structures. Like just described. Like we have a CEO who's not a real CEO, and the CMO is the real CEO, but for legal purpose, blah, blah, blah. Like there might have been good reasons, I'm sure there were good reasons to set up a company like that, but this is not something we want to see. We like to see very clear lines of responsibility within the company. And another way that I like to think about it is, we're giving money to this company. So why are we giving the money to the company? Why do we invest in the company?
But we see the product and the change, the
We're expecting to get what?
get back money.
Returns.
Yes,
Very high return.
Yeah.
Who's going to generate those returns? Who's responsible for that?
I think yes, the CEO
The
first.
CEO. So we view that the primary, from my perspective, the primary responsibility of the CEO is generating our returns. You know, so we give the money to the company, of course. We don't give, we invest the money in the company, of course, but the CEO is the person that we expect is going to generate those returns. So again, no CEO, that means nobody to generate returns.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's about CEO. And what about CTO?
It's very important. That like the innovation for the product in case of the technology.
Yeah, so especially for the type of companies that we invest in, usually the two most important team members are the CEO and the CTO.
Yeah.
The CTO is the Chief Technology Officer. He's the person that he or she, and again, CEO also he or she, is responsible for the technology.
Yeah.
They built the technology, they manage the building technology. They are the one developing the technology vision and technology roadmap, where the CEO is developing the product and company vision and roadmap. So CTO is right up there with CEO as one of the two most important people on the team. So is it okay we don't have a full-time CTO?
Full-time?
Part-time CTO okay? Not okay. Instant reject.
Yes.
No full-time CTO, we reject immediately. Or we say, okay, if we really like this business, you can come back when you have a full-time CTO. Come back and see us when we have a full-time CTO. Part-time CTO, reject. CTO is running their own company, doing development, and we have a relationship with them, blah, 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 reject. So, yeah, we can't have part-time or outsourced CTO. This business will never scale. So these are some pretty firm, rules, I would say, from an investor perspective at the team. What about, we have a part-time CTO who's going to join as soon as the money comes in. Going to join full-time as soon as the investment comes in, okay? Also not okay. Totally not okay. Why? Okay, couple reasons. So, okay, when we look at team members for your startup, there are two types of team members, management team members. There's full-time and there's everybody else. So anyone who's not full-time is anybody else. So we give, and then let's say on a 0 to 100 point scale, full-time is equal to 100 and everything else is equal to 1. That's it. So we don't really care why they're part-time, how part-time they are, what else they're doing on the side, how good friends we are, how long the relationship has been, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. They're not full-time, they don't count. They're not, maybe 1 is even too generous. If they're not full-time, they're 0. So there's full-time and 0. And that makes it easier to understand. Okay.
How about the distance?
Oh, location?
The location.
So, okay, with I think location we can work with. So let's say it makes sense, like the CEOs in Singapore and the CTOs in Vietnam, because the developers cost 10% as much, and we have good reason for that. Okay, so I think that we don't have a big issue with that, but we must have full-time CEO and full-time CTO. Now, why is it not, okay, how about, what's wrong with the CTO will join full-time as soon as we raise the money?
CTO isn't believing that.
No, yeah, I'll join full-time as soon as we raise the money too. Everybody will join full-time as soon as we raise the money.
So it needs to be a problematic CEO.
I mean, why are they waiting for the money?
Opportunities. So they don't make that.
Not committed. Not committed. Don't believe in the idea. But it's very difficult to sell. Okay, because on one side of the mouth, you're saying to the investor, this is a $100 million company. We're going to sell this company for $100 million. On the other side of the mouth, you're saying, but our CTO is waiting for the investment to join full time because they're not willing to take the risk. Now our story doesn't make any sense. So, all variations on, we have a part-time CTO, all variations on we're going, who's going to join when we raise money are non-starters. Now, on the other hand, it's okay that we will be hiring people when we raise money. We expect that. Actually, that's one of the most likely uses of funds that you're raising money for, to hire people. But it can't be to form the management team. The management team needs to be formed first. Now, one exception I would say to this is, let's say, it's also not, we also understand that people have to live and eat, and they may not be able, a lot of people may not be able to work full-time for a company for no salary because they don't have sufficient personal savings to satisfy their basic requirements, for food and shelter, etc. So I would say we have a full-time CTO, but they doing some consulting or project work on the side is okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's in our business at our stage is understandable. We don't expect people to eat air, or live on nothing, and we don't expect that a lot of times people who are involved in startups, especially at early stages in their career, they might not have sufficient personal savings. So if they have some other way to make money, it's okay. But as long as they're not running another business or doing this part-time. It's okay they're doing this full-time, doing something else part-time, then they're going to stop the part-time outside work when the money comes in. That's fair. So, okay, so we have that full-time team, CEO, CTO.
Not the other.
What's it?
Full-time startups, part-time contracts, not the other.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. Then the third person we would like to see is what I would call CMO, or somebody who is in charge of sales and marketing, because that's usually if nobody's doing that, then the CEO is doing that, okay, at the beginning, but it helps a lot if we can have somebody who can really get up and sell. Okay. Okay, so now that's about the team. Now we want to look at some legal and regulatory issues around startups. First, I'll talk about IP strategy. I think we discussed this briefly during the advantage section, but I'll just review this in a little more detail now. So, IP strategy has 5 types of intellectual property that the company might be able to develop: patents, copyrights, trademarks, registered designs, and trade secrets. Registered designs are pretty specific, so we'll leave those out. Most companies that we work with will, if they do have a proprietary intellectual property, it will be in the form of patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. Let's just review what is covered by each one. So patents are Protect what?
Copycat technology.
Oh, what can we protect? What type of intellectual property? Yeah, what type of intellectual property can we protect with a patent?
Product design.
The general case. General case, patents protect what?
Fake product.
Yeah, what can I apply for a patent? What type of thing?
Depending on the country.
I mean, every country that has patent protection, yeah. Patents protect what? Product. More specifically,
How especially the
how it works, how it delivers. That's it.
Now,
Okay, can I patent color?
no.
No. Can I patent what? Can I patent food?
we didn't have food. A new one.
Formula. You can patent formula. Food formula.
Maybe, but in general terms, patents protect inventions. Okay, so if I have an invention, I can patent it. So what is an invention? An invention is something that is novel, useful, and non-obvious. Novel, useful, non-obvious. Novel means new. Useful means, has a use or has an application. And non-obvious means this invention is not obvious to whom?
User.
To a person skilled in the art, meaning to somebody with similar, expert skill set as yours. So if we have an invention that is novel, useful, and non-obvious, then we can apply for patent for it. A lot of our businesses, this may not apply, but in some cases it does. So if we can apply for a patent, should we do it? If we have invented something that meets the test for patentability, should we patent it?
Yeah. Well, it depends though.
It depends on.
It depends on if you want to really let the competitors see the description of what it is.
Yeah, agreed. So I think we need to know one more thing. So we need to know, does it qualify for patent? And two, second thing we need to know is, does it make sense to patent? And what would determine that is, I usually will think about it this way. When we patent something, we have to disclose exactly how we were able to achieve this invention. So some types of inventions, once we disclose how we were able to achieve the invention, it becomes very easy for somebody to not copy what we did, because actually, if we patent something, if we patent an invention and somebody copies it using our patent filing, this creates an opportunity for us to take legal action against them and make a lot of money. So actually, this is why we patent, right? We patent our inventions so that if somebody copies us, we can sue them. And actually, we can always sue them, but we patent our inventions so that if somebody copies us, we have a better chance of winning when we sue them. But so that's actually not what we're worried about. we're not so worried about somebody reads our patent and copies it line for line, because in fact that's why we patented this. But what are we worried about? We're worried that somebody who reads our patent can reproduce our, what I would call, value proposition without copying our invention. So how does that work? And another way that we can think about this is we can describe the invention as, the patent for the invention as strong or weak. Strong means that even if somebody reads everything in our patent filing, they can't produce the same result as us without the exact same amount of work that went into the original solution. The great example of this is what? What are the strongest, some of the strongest patents that we know about?
Batteries.
Which one?
Battery.
Battery?
Yeah.
What else?
iPhone.
Hmm?
iPhone.
Handphone.
iPhone.
Oh, iPhone. I don't know, Samsung seems to do a pretty good job copying that iPhone until they got the exploding Galaxy feature. Yeah, how come Apple hasn't incorporated that exploding feature yet? But yeah, but you're right, there's some successful lawsuits by Apple. But okay, my example is pharmaceutical drugs. So we always patent pharmaceutical drugs when we discover them as a startup, when we invent them as a startup. Why? Because the invention of a new pharmaceutical drug, when somebody reads my patent filing, it doesn't help them develop the exact same result as my drug without incurring the exact same amount of time and money that it costs me to create this drug. So patents for pharmaceutical drugs, therefore, are very strong. On the other hand, what's very weak? Very weak patents are, for example, software. You very rarely see software protected by patents. Why? How many people write software in our group? So let's say you read somebody's patent for a particular type of software that they wrote. Like, how difficult is it once you see all their code to just write your own code that doesn't reuse their key claims, but gives almost the same result? Very easy, right? Skilled software developers can easily work around software patents, which is why you very rarely see software protected by patents. Same thing, okay, this comes up a lot when we consider algorithms. Algorithms, if people want to copyright some of it, if people want to patent some type of software, they usually will be patenting algorithms. Algorithms are another sticky situation because oftentimes the insight that is patented in algorithm, if somebody that's familiar with this problem sees the solution, they may be able to come up with another solution that doesn't actually violate the patent claim, but still achieves a similar result. So on the far end of this scale is formula. We almost never see formulas patented. And there's some very famous formulas that are protected as trade secrets, like Coca-Cola, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Spice, right? And why are they protected as trade secrets rather than patents? Because again, once somebody sees your formula, it may not be that difficult for them to modify the formula somehow, so they don't have the exact same formula as yours, but achieve a similar result. And also, it's very difficult to prove infringement. Like, let's say I build a new device and I patent that device, and somebody copies my design. I buy a copy of their copy. I compare it to my design. It's the same. It's infringed. But let's say somebody produces, steals the Coke formula and produces a new Coke, a new drink that tastes just like Coke. How do you prove that they use the formula? Because the formula typically doesn't just include the ingredients. It's not just 1 ounce of this and 2 grams of that and 3 ounces of this. It's the formula is the steps in which the elements of the formula combined. Usually it may be like the timing of the steps. It may be the temperature at which ingredients were added, blah, blah, blah. How do you know that this person followed that exact same formula? How would you ever prove that? So therefore, we almost never see formulas patented. And the vast majority of proprietary formulas are kept as trade secrets. Okay, another drawback of patents that we don't always think about, but might be considered, is how long do patents last? 5 years. So patents do have real expiry date. Usually they usually last for 20 years. So this is good, but in some, some types of intellectual property may be valuable for more than 20 years. So in this case, we might want to consider whether the patent or not. Copyrights protect what? So patents protect inventions. Copyrights protect
auto. The price always refer to the author who did first, right?
So copyright is owned by the author, but it protects what? It doesn't protect inventions, it protects works. Works are words or music or images, and so all of these works can be copyrighted. Now, copyright, again, may or may not be that valuable for our business, because for a similar reason to not patent software, we usually don't even bother to copyright software, because again, the copyright for software covers the exact lines of code that are written. If somebody modifies that code and delivers a similar result, it's not a copyright violation.
What about Mickey Mouse? How much can you change in Mickey Mouse so that it's not violating copyright?
Oh, so I would say Mickey Mouse is covered by both copyright and trademark, depending on the image or the mark, or the character himself. So yeah, something like that. If you have a character, so let's say if you have a character, then definitely copyright makes sense. If you have a image, that valuable image, copyright makes sense. Because definitely, if you have a Mickey Mouse character that you have copyrighted and you have the name Mickey Mouse trademark, nobody can copy that. Now, of course, your copyright will have to describe, will have to, won't cover any type of funny mouse, but it will cover that. It will cover that mouse. And this also leads to trademarks. So trademarks will also, for any mark that we use in trade, we can get protection of the trademark. Now, interestingly, patents are acquired through application, but copyright can be, copyright is acquired without registration. So copyright is acquired through creation. So as soon as you create something, you own the copyright. This is in countries that subscribe to international copyright treaties. So if copyright, if you acquire copyright by creating, why do people bother to put copyright notices on things?
Because there are different licenses. There are different copyright licenses.
Like?
Creative Commons, GNU.
Oh, but these are the sort of opposite of copyright, right? These are conventions where copyright holders give others the right to use copyright what would otherwise be copyright material. But why? But the reason, okay, I'll just tell you. The reason people put copyright notices on proprietary information that they want to hold the copyright to, it's not because that's required. It's because it helps them in enforcement. Because let's say later you go to sue somebody for copyright infringement. What's their first defense going to be? Their defense is, I didn't know this was copyright. So by printing copyright notice on something, you help to position yourself to defeat that defense. Okay, and then trade secrets are protection of intellectual property by keeping it secret, which sounds funny, but actually this can be very useful. A lot of important intellectual property is protected by keeping secret. Now, how do we enforce trade secrets?
Contracts.
Yeah, so this is different from the other forms of IP strategy, IP protection. Because the other forms of IP protection, how do we enforce?
Government.
Yeah, using the legal system, the justice system. But for trade secrets, it's not a matter of law, it's a matter of contract. So we have to, if we protect important information with trade secrets, we must have contracts to enforce that. And what's the most common type of contract that we should have?
Yeah.
Non-disclosure agreements. And who do we need non-disclosure agreements with?
Anyone you talk to who might come in contact with it, basically.
But most important is employees. So make sure all our employment agreements have non-disclosure clauses. Now, okay, one issue that comes up around this point fairly frequently is non-disclosure agreements for investors. Yeah. So should we require investors to sign non-disclosure agreements? I heard no and yes.
Like the investors will normally not sign on the non-disclosure agreement, like in the early stage.
Yeah, and you said yes.
Yeah, because we never know what happens. You may, an investor may just accidentally disclose it in the future, or
So I think both are correct. So typically we don't require the investors to sign non-disclosure agreements in the first meetings. However, if investors want more detail after initial meetings, then it's reasonable to ask them to sign non-disclosure agreements. So how does that work, and why do we do it that way? If we have an initial meeting with an investor, first meeting, or let's say first or second meeting, the best approach, I think, is we have presentations for investors that do not include disclosed material. Meaning we don't disclose anything in the presentation that would be damaging for us if it was somehow circulated to others. But if we get an investor who's serious, they're going to want more information than that. And once they request more information than that, that's when we require non-disclosure agreement. And that's when credible investors will be willing to sign. They won't be willing to sign in the first meetings. Why? Why would investors not want to sign a non-disclosure agreement before the first meeting? Which I can tell you, for example, we definitely won't sign before the first meeting.
Why should they?
Wow, a question from Zoom. Thank you. What's that? Why should they?
Wait, yeah, why should they?
I mean, okay, I can, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I can argue, why shouldn't they? If they're not planning to disclose it, then they should be willing to sign, right?
too much of a hassle.
It's not a hassle, just sign one document, it's okay. No, but I'll tell you why we don't sign before the first meeting. I mean, yeah, definitely there's some element of why should we, but I think the main reason is we see a lot of ideas, a lot. And it is possible that I saw your same idea as you already in a previous meeting. But when you presented to me, if I sign non-disclosure on that, and then actually I've already seen it, then it can become an issue. Because now it appears like I'm actually violating that agreement, although I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, let's say the company that I saw last week has the same idea as yours, and I actually invested in them. And then when I see you the next week, and I sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you present to me, and later when that company becomes successful, you claim that we stole your idea, which can happen. So this is why we usually won't sign the first meeting, and this is why the solution, the way out of this apparent conundrum is just don't present anything that you don't want to disclose in the first meeting. Now, like sometimes entrepreneurs will feel like, but without a non-disclosure agreement, I don't even want to present my idea. Because what if somebody copies my idea? So I always feel like, wow, if the company is so worried about just disclosing their idea because then somebody can copy it, then you might as well just shut down the business now. Because that means there's absolutely no competitive advantage. So non-disclosure agreements before detail, but not before first meeting. Yeah.
If they require some details and they take notes in the first meeting, how about that?
Like,
For example, like they ask about revenue, and they come and kind of show to the investors. Right? They ask them to say that they can take notes.
yeah, I mean, I would say something like revenue, I wouldn't worry too much about disclosing, but it would, if the investor asked me something in a first meeting that I wasn't comfortable disclosing, I would say I'm happy to discuss that as soon as we have a non-disclosure agreement. You know, so I think, and I feel as long as entrepreneurs are aware of what should be covered in a non-disclosure agreement, investors will not have a problem with that. Okay, so this is just more detail on the various forms of IP. Now I want to look at I want to move from there, since we're talking about non-disclosure agreements, I want to now talk about some other legal issues. Legal and what I would call legal and regulatory issues. So first up is forms of organization of the company. This one I think is pretty straightforward. We must have a company. Okay, sometimes we meet entrepreneurs who don't have a company yet. That's okay, but then we will help them set up a company. Of course, in order to get investment, you have to have a company. No professional investor will invest in anything other than a company. There's, in most jurisdictions, different forms of companies that you can set up. This list here is based basically on Singapore. So we have sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited liability partnerships, which are all businesses. They're not companies. Under companies, we have private limited, public companies, and listed public companies. Now, what's the difference between a business and a company? Oftentimes we use these phrases, these terms somewhat interchangeably, but actually their specific meaning is very different.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a business and a company?
Company is just like a level of unit, so it's protected by law. Right? It should be registered to the government.
But business can also be registered.
But it's just like, I think it's just like the logical of the company. Company is a physical unit. The business is just like logical. We define business it could be company or could be something you cooperate with the other. But the company is a physical, and you have to register and have a business license or something like this.
Okay, so this can vary from country to country, but which is definitely, so we have to adjust based on that. But the general case is a company is a legal person. A business is not.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, I'm not that familiar with Vietnam law, so I don't know if that's the case here. But like in Singapore, the US, or EU, or any other jurisdiction that I've been involved in, a company is a legal person. A business is not. What does that mean? A legal person means, the government, it's not that people imagine the company is a person, but it's treated the same as a person by the law.
Yeah.
A business is not. A business is a form of organization where individuals come together to do some business, but the law does not see them as an individual person. So this is really important because why?
Can you make an example of a business that is not a company?
Sole proprietorship or partnership or limited liability partnership.
Okay.
So let's say, me and you set up a partnership. We register, our business name. We start conducting business as partners. But our business is not a company, meaning legally we're just two people working together. All the money that we get is personal income for us. If one of our creditors has a claim, it's a personal claim against us. If the company fails and we owe people money, if the business fails and we owe people money, we're required to pay that back. So a company is not like that.
Yeah.
A company is a legal person, or it's an entity recognized by law. So this is really, really important. We only want to set up our company as what would in Singapore be called a private limited company. In the US, we would call it an incorporated company. In the US, there's a couple of different versions of this, but basically we want to be a private limited company or incorporated company. We need our entity that will receive investment needs to be a legal person. And this is as important for you as it is for us. Why? If you're operating as a business rather than a company, you have personal liability for the debts that company incurs. And if the company has a financial problem, that the creditors of that company can solve that problem with your personal assets, which is not the case if you're a company.
Where's the insurance companies?
What's that?
Shareholder.
Yeah. So the liability of shareholders in a privately held company. So the liability of shareholders. Okay, again, I'm not familiar with Vietnam law on this point, but in Singapore or the U.S., the liability of shareholders in the privately held company is limited to the amount of money that they put in for the shares. So shareholders can never be subject to financial claims by creditors of their company for anything more than the contribution to the company. Meaning, if we invested $100,000 into this company, we can never be held liable for more than that, and only the company can be held liable. Shareholders don't have any liability, financial liabilities for companies that they invest in. That's what limited means, yeah. So limited liability means that the liability stops at the company level, not the shareholder level. And you're a shareholder also as an entrepreneur, so you definitely want that. Because unless you're a company, you could have potentially unlimited liability. This also applies to things like lawsuits. Let's say your company produces a product that kills somebody somehow, and somebody sues that company and to collect damage. If the company is at fault and they have to pay, that could be very bad for the company. But if you produce that product as a business, then that person can also sue you personally, and you might have to. You would be liable for that from your own finances.
So why would you form a business then?
You don't know why. Sometimes entrepreneurs do that because they don't understand the distinction that I'm making here, or it's cheaper to set up a business, or they just don't want to take the time to set up a company. So usually there's more maintenance required in companies. There might be required regulatory filing, and you might have to keep a set of accounts. So let's say compliance for companies is more than businesses, but cost and compliance would be higher, but definitely is no option, just have to have a company. Now, where should we set up our company? And this is highly relevant for us in Vietnam. Like today, even today, the vast majority of investors will prefer to invest in a Vietnamese company through a Singapore company. And this is not just Vietnam, same thing in Thailand. So all of the investments we make in Thailand, we put into Singapore companies. Then Singapore companies own the Thai companies. In Vietnam, it's still the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, I believe this will be changing over time, but for now, it's still highly preferable if you want to raise money to have the investment vehicle not be a local company. Why? One is tax. So in Singapore, capital gains are not taxed. So if an investor invests in a Singapore company and then later sells their stake in that company, they don't pay any tax on it. In Vietnam or Thailand, it's not true. You would have to pay tax.
Hopefully we can set it from a paying tax. So that's
Yeah. So, and then also other compliance requirements and licensing requirements. But if you're operating in Vietnam, you're going to need a Vietnam company also. So you would most likely have, if possible, you have a Singapore company that owns your local company.
22% tax. 22%.
Yeah, 22% is a lot. So, but this one is also a little complicated, so you probably have to work with somebody that knows how to do these setups.
And I'll start sleeping some.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons that companies set up in Singapore, because favorable tax and also favorable corporate governance and ease of business setup and transparency and stuff.
So if you make money in Vietnam, would you have to pay the income tax to the government?
Sure.
Even though it's a Singaporean company.
No difference.
So definitely you're going to have to pay like all relevant tax, but this will something you want to work with an advisor that really understands how this works.
Typically, they have the headquarters in Singapore and the branch in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The circular will come to Singapore.
Directly.
Yeah.
So
It's a multi-license. Yes.
It's not really companies.
Yeah, it is typically cash. For example, right now, I think Coco they already moved into Singapore.
No, so they have like set up.
So from the I'm considered to set up a company based on this community.
Okay, so that's our form of incorporation. Now I want to look at our key agreements. So what are the agreements that we're going to need for our company? Now, the first thing we should have is a shareholder agreement. So the shareholder agreement sets out the rights and responsibilities of the shareholders in the company. And this will, at the beginning, will be an agreement among just the founders, because they'll be the initial shareholders. You would be amazed at the number of startups we need that don't have these agreements. Or maybe not amazed. Like, yeah. And yeah, it's very common that people set up their startup.
You mean an agreement about the responsibility or in terms of the shares?
The rights and responsibilities of the shareholders. And also sets out what happens when different actions are taken by shareholders. So, example, like, let's say we have a company where you have how many shareholders? Let's say you have 3 shareholders, and one shareholder has 60%, and the other 2 have 20% each. So what happens if the 60% shareholder decides to transfer all the IP from this company to a new company that they own 100%?
Basically, some important decision we have 75 percent shareholder,
so let's say-
for example.
So let's say they have 75% and the other two shareholders. So, or let's say two shareholders, one with 60, one with 20, decide to transfer all the IP to a new company. What happens to the 20% shareholder?
So follow this line.
What do they-
Accept.
What do they get? Zero. Nothing, because there's no agreement. So actually, they just lost everything.
Yeah.
Okay with that? I would not be okay with that. So I think, we want to have a shareholder agreement that very specifically sets out the rights and responsibility of shareholders. Otherwise, the rights and responsibility of shareholders are just determined by law. Not, let's say you're the 20% shareholder in that company.
Yeah.
You're not happy with that outcome, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't maybe what you thought was going to happen when you joined the company. Maybe you thought you were going to be included in the new company if there was a new company. But the other guys didn't think that because there's no agreement. What about, and this is ordinarily there are lots of actions that majority shareholders can take that are not favorable for minority shareholders. So we want to have an agreement that is clear about that. And then I think we talked about this already, but what about what happens to shares held by if shareholders leave the company?
I think typically, from my experience, for example, we have agreement that if you join as share, you have to stay there at least 3 years, for example. And if you leave sooner, you have to sell back to the company with the original price.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, what if we don't have an agreement?
Yeah.
Even it's legal it's legal by the government.
Oh, it's not legal because he still stay in the business for a long time. I saw many cases. He joined a company at the very majority shareholder. Then he does nothing. He leaves to work in another company, and he still stay there even all the company is success.
No, at that time you need to have the meeting like the board.
But he doesn't need money. He said
board director and then board committee, and then you give out the decision. Okay, this one with the agreement of.
I understand, but the agreement that is at first, at the beginning. At the beginning, they have no agreement, and he worked 1 year. After 1 year, he leave, and others still working.
So this kind of situation, we usually address 2 ways. One is shareholder agreement, the other is employment agreement. So every founder should also have an employment agreement.
Yeah.
And if they're a shareholder and a founder, if they're an employee and a shareholder, then their relationship between their employment and their shareholding should be clear.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about this later also in investment terms, but every founder and every employee, if they have shares or options, should have a vesting schedule that clearly sets out when they get to keep their shares, under what circumstances they keep shares, under what circumstances they have to give back shares. So this is the type of thing that will get handled in employment agreement and shareholder agreement.
Is there any well-established framework for this?
Yeah.
So when you establish the company, is there the default agreement for you? For example, is how many percent
Well-established framework for vesting.
For all of those?
Oh yeah, there's lots of different frameworks. But and we'll talk. We have some like template agreements you can have if you want, but there's also other template agreements as well.
Okay. Is that a default agreement?
The default like if you have the member more than 75%, you can have
Okay. So
something like that.
Okay, that's defined by the law.
But one thing is we don't want to. I mean, things that are defined by law we don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
But things that we do want to worry about are things that are not defined by law or things that might be subject to interpretation under law. So, and then there's a question here about verbal agreement. So verbal agreements versus written agreements. Verbal agreements in most countries are also binding, but the problem with verbal agreements is the enforceability. So let's say when we have a verbal agreement, and then later we disagree on what was agreed. Now when we go to court to fight about this, there's two positions. You know, he said, I remember he said that. So very difficult to resolve. If we have a contract, it's easier to resolve. Now, having a contract also doesn't solve every problem because there can be disagreements in interpretation of the contract. There can be situations missing from the contract. So contracts don't solve every problem, but they make it a lot easier. Now, one situation I see a lot is the startup founders say, we don't need all these contracts because we're friends.
In many cases.
Yeah. And therefore we can just agree because we're friends.
Yeah.
But I always say it's exactly opposite. Like, because why? Because you want to stay friends. So good agreements are good for your friendship also. When we have bad agreements or missing agreements, when things go wrong, our friendship can also be on the line. Because most of the disputes I see, okay, sometimes I'll see disputes among founder teams, you know, where it's like good and evil. You know, one person is good, the other person is evil, and the good person is being exploited by the evil person. But this is very rare. In most cases, we have two good people with a different recollection, a different interpretation, a different understanding of what happened. So I think in that case, having a written agreement can avoid a lot of pain later. So it might seem painful now to do these agreements, but definitely the pain you will experience later is much worse.
Yeah.
And like, for example, how should we allocate the equity? Like, let's say we have 4 founders. How should we divide the equity?
It's based on the who is the like the key, is the most important in this business. For example, CEO is very important, so he is like his child, his son. So I think he has most share, and then we define, for example, CTO, something like this, and then agreement between.
For example, my company, the pre-policy we define by money. We define by three criteria. First, the total share of money. Secondly, is the value of the knowledge. And the third is the position and the responsibility of each person in the company from the beginning, and then we divide it by the share of each person. And we can define by person share how many shares.
How do you compare the knowledge in each other? For example,
from the beginning, we define that okay, the knowledge is valued at how much. For example, 500.
You put into this service, right? The
knowledge plus mean the technology. The software is valued at 500 million, and the company is total valued at 1 billion. So you got 50% share.
For me, I think it's better that you define the percent first. For me, because I think we don't know in advance how much we need, how much money we need for this business. Because I know you said that it's 1 billion, then you define a role. So I think for me, I think we should define first the share. Then we think how much money we need.
So then you don't have to sit with him. You can go to find out the person. Okay, because every business starts from the understanding each other, person to person. Then lately is the trust. Okay, the trust can make it worthy how much money of the knowledge or the technology is worthy. So it depends on you. So if you said that, okay, it doesn't matter, and then the business doesn't go.
Yeah, I like to, okay, for me, I look at two things. One is, what has each person on the team contributed up until now?
Yeah.
And then two is, what will everybody on the team contribute in the future? So one is contribution to date, and two is contribution in the future. And then we can balance those two. Okay, so I want to take our break now. It's now 4:45. So we'll take a 20-minute break, and then we'll resume at 5:05 to start talking about fundraising and financing. What's that?
Efforts, working hours.
Smart. So many businesses disrupted because of the conflict between the
Lazada thì mình đã rằng là có cái kinh nghiệm inventory với lại inventory của cái client.
Anh đi mua hàng đó, anh đi mua hàng thì
Fundraising might be interesting for
mày đóng tin đâu?
me too.
Mày định xem lần 2 lần vẫn mua rồi đó, đúng không? Đúng. Thành ra nó bảo thay tao chỉ có ra thì có online không sai thì nó làm tốt đấy tốt.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's continue now with fundraising process. So, when we talk about the key players in the fundraising process, this is not, pretty easy, but it's worth going over. So, there were two sides to the fundraising process: the entrepreneurs that create fundraising vehicles and the investors that invest in those vehicles. When we think about entrepreneurs, we divide into two categories. We call them lifestyle entrepreneurs and high growth or scalable entrepreneurs. So lifestyle entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs that create businesses to essentially pay themselves, and high growth entrepreneurs or scalable entrepreneurs are those who create companies to make money for themselves and investors. The first category of entrepreneur we cannot invest in. So we don't invest in lifestyle entrepreneurs who create businesses that generate a nice return for the founders, but not for investors. We look only at the second category, which we call high growth or scalable entrepreneurs, which I think everybody in our program is well acquainted with because they're all trying to start businesses like that. Now, sometimes there might be some edge cases or big cases that we can't exactly categorize, but if it's not clearly a high growth or scalable business, we won't invest. So this is because of the cost of capital for these type of investments, and also because lifestyle entrepreneurs, by definition, will be paying out too much of the value of the business in themselves, which means that they're not going to generate the required return for investors. Let's look at venture investors on the other side. So there are 5 categories of venture investors that I want to consider, starting with, I'll work from the bottom of my list here, starting with banks and government. So banks and government play different roles in venture investment. Oftentimes government provides either subsidized or very low cost funding for startup companies. This depends on the country and depends on the program within the country. So in Singapore, for example, government is a big player in funding startup companies, and when we work with companies there, we have and will continue to tap on relevant government funding programs. Thailand government is also now starting to get very involved in providing funding for startups. Vietnam government, I understand, also recently has begun programs to help startup companies. So I think definitely we, as a startup, we want to look carefully at government funding options, public sector funding options, and we should take advantage of programs that we qualify for and that provide attractive funding options. Now, things that we need to watch for, look out for in government funding programs based on our experience are the details of the funding programs are really important because typical government funding programs take various forms. So one form is outright grants, meaning money is granted to the company without obligations. This is relatively rare, but we want to look at that. Another is co-funding programs or matching programs. So where public funds are supplied when private funds come in at some matching level, which can be in Singapore very common. So we want to take a look at those. Another is subsidies or guarantees. So for example, government might guarantee loans from banks in order to encourage banks to make loans to startups. There can be reimbursement programs where expenses are reimbursed up to a certain percentage. So the key thing here is to, when you explore government funding programs, to understand the whole landscape of programs and to pick programs that are the best for you. There can be hidden costs, what I would call hidden costs, in some public sector funding programs. What do the hidden costs look like? They usually come in a few different forms. One form is the hidden cost of compliance. Now, there may be a lot of overhead that comes with a government funding program, like reporting requirements, record-keeping requirements. So, for example, like we've seen some public sector funding programs where, although you don't get that much money, you might have to hire a full-time person just to comply with the requirements of the program. This may make it not as attractive as it first appeared. Another hidden cost in public sector funding programs can be limitations on the use of the funds. So some public sector funding programs might come with requirements that you spend the money in a certain way or on certain items that are not necessarily the choices that you would make otherwise if there was no restriction on the funding. And this can cause the company to misallocate revenue or misallocate funds, meaning this can cause you to invest in things you might not otherwise have invested in. Example, like for some programs in Singapore might require that you spend a certain amount of money on services delivered in Singapore. It might make more sense, for example, from a purely financial perspective for the company to hire overseas developer, for example, or outsource their development work to, for example, like a Vietnam company. But the funding program requires them to spend locally, so they might hire a higher cost worker, which may not make sense for the company in the long run. So it's really important to make sure that you understand the key requirements in the program, you understand any restrictions on spending, understand the compliance costs. And it's also very important that you understand all the details in the program, because I've seen cases where company signs up for a program that says where they think they're going to get reimbursed for, let's say, example, the manpower cost. So they believe they're going to get reimbursed for 100% of their manpower costs. But then after they sign up for the program, you realize actually there's a very specific definition of manpower. So in this case, maybe it only includes Singapore citizens or permanent residents. Anybody who's not a Singapore citizen or permanent resident is not considered manpower in the case of this particular funding program. And then you realize that there's a term within the program that says you can only be reimbursed for qualifying costs. So qualifying costs may be not all the manpower manpower costs. And then actually then you realize you can be reimbursed up to a certain percent. So let's say up to 70%. You thought you were going to get 70%, but up to 70% means actually anything 70% or less. And then you realize you're actually going to get reimbursed by quarter after you spend the money. So it's really important to understand how the programs work and how they fit your cash flows. So I would look very closely at that. Also, sometimes public sector funding programs come with preclusions, meaning if we participate in program A, we're disqualified from program B. And maybe program B would have been much more attractive for you if you had looked at it in advance. So look at the big picture. And
the time for reading those files could be time wasting.
yeah, so sometimes you might want to work with somebody that understands all these programs and can recommend programs for you and make sure you don't make mistakes. Next is banks. So especially now, banks are starting to offer special forms of lending called venture debt. Traditional bank lending is very rare, very rarely accessible to or applicable to the types of companies that we invest in. So high growth startups traditionally are not able to raise funding through bank debt. And even if they could raise funding through bank debt, we usually don't advise that they take bank debt because the risk of the bank debt is not something that fits with the typical cash flow profile of a scalable startup. Meaning, the traditional bank debt requires regular and usually immediate repayment on a fixed schedule, and most high growth startups won't have highly predictable cash flows, which means it's not a good idea to put traditional debt on top of a seed stage or early stage startup. And can also require collateral, can require personal guarantees, all of which are not a good idea for seed stage startups. So now there are some banks have started to offer something called venture debt, which is a specially structured type of debt that is designed for startup companies. But in most cases, this venture debt, it's still not applicable at the seed stage. In most cases, the venture debt programs are more geared toward later stage startups, which are raising like a Series B or later financing round. Usually the venture debt is included as part of that funding round, and it's used to lower the total cost of the round. So if some of a later funding round is split between venture debt and equity, the startup might give up less equity, or the company might give up less equity in that round than they would have if it was a pure equity round. Again, for venture debt funding, it's probably not going to be an important component of your first or second round funding strategy. And if you decide to incorporate venture debt later, then you really need to look carefully at the total cost. Sometimes the venture debt programs come with warrants, meaning the company has to give up some type of equity anyway as part of the venture debt funding. So you have to look, again, carefully understand how the program works. How does it compare to doing the whole round in straight equity? And is the apparent savings that we get actually equal to the actual savings? And are there any other requirements or limitation on the company that come as part of this step? So government and banks, definitely we have to look at what they're offering. On the government side, we probably do want to take advantage of relevant programs at the seed stage if they're suitable for us. But banks typically are not going to be important players at this stage funding seed stage startups. Now, recently, some banks have started to run incubators, accelerator programs, so we might want to look at that as another form of support coming from banks. Okay, second category of investor that I want to talk about are corporate VCs and strategic investors. So corporate VCs and strategic investors are venture investors that are attached to or part of companies for whom venture investing is not their core business. So this would cover a wide range of companies. It can be tech companies. It can be financial services companies. For example, Microsoft has a corporate venture arm. Google has a corporate venture arm. And in Singapore now and Thailand, many banks are launching corporate venture arms. Large tech companies typically have corporate venture arms. So this is a real situation that a lot of startups will face. Telcos sometimes have corporate venture arms. So you start getting corporate venture capitalists coming into the mix pretty early in your fundraising history. So what are the pluses of corporate venture capital investment? So the pluses of corporate venture capital investors are they usually will be less stringent on valuation than strict financial venture capital investors. So for this discussion, we'll distinguish between corporate venture capital investors and financial venture capital investors. Financial venture capital investors are venture capital investors for whom VC investment is their primary business. Corporate means they're attached to a company that does something other than venture capital. So typically corporate VCs will be easier on valuation. They can help the company to grow because they usually look to invest in companies that are in the same industry as theirs. And they can provide a ready exit route because they often are looking to ultimately buy the companies they invest in the early stage. So this sounds like corporate VC should be very high on our list of potential investors. Agree or disagree? Agree. Sounds really good. And in some way, it sounds like almost too good to be true because, I left out one thing. They have deep pockets too because they're affiliated with a big company. So deep pockets, easier on valuation, can help the company grow and can even provide an exit route. So this sounds almost too good to be true. And we know that when something sounds too good to be true, it's not true. So there must be some gotcha, there must be some dark side to investment from corporate VCs. And there is. What is it?
Okay. Douglas, can I ask a question? Douglas?
Yes?
Regarding questions for you. So, just for example, you're talking about corporate VC. So much noise. You're talking about corporate VC, so I'm just wondering, for example, if we talk about, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Really? Okay, there's feedback from the noise. If we talking about fintech, for example, right? There's a lot of talk about fintech and a lot of banks. There is some talk about investing in fintech. Would you consider that to be corporate VC?
So I think your question was about banks that are investing in fintech companies. Do we consider that corporate VC, right?
Yeah, well, I think they're saying they want to, but I'm not sure they do.
So yeah, definitely that I would consider that corporate VC. So for me, corporate VC, it's any venture investor that is investing for strategic as well as financial return. So let's say if a bank has a venture capital fund that invests solely for financial return, I won't consider them corporate VC. If the bank has a venture fund that invests both for financial and strategic return, then we'll consider that a corporate VC.
Okay. Thanks.
Oh, welcome. And okay, so what's the dark side of corporate VC? Because I can tell you there is a very dark side. Meaning there is a big minus that's not so obvious from what I just talked about, but that's very real.
You may end up competing with right. And then they may shut you down or they don't know much about your company.
Okay, so these are some specific risks. Yeah, and I would characterize these under a general risk of what I call divergence of interest. Divergence of interest. Now, how does that work? Let's think more closely for a minute about the motive, the interest of corporate VC. So it sounds good that the corporate VC wants to maybe buy you because actually we want to sell the company. So isn't it great that one of our early investors actually wants to buy us? Or is there some issue there? There's a tremendous issue there. Why? Because there is an inherent conflict of interest between investor and acquirer. What's the inherent conflict of interest?
They sold a lot of information. Right? And they use that information to set up something like CEVA.
Oh, I mean, that's another potential conflict, but there's even a more basic conflict.
Investor invests for the value to grow, for the value of the company to grow, but buyer at that very moment they want to get the valuation much lower.
Yes, investors want the highest possible sale price. Buyers want the lowest possible sale price. So when your buyer is an existing investor, they are inherently conflicted. And this, from this point, stems a lot of challenges that we have with corporate VCs or strategic investors. Example, this is why for corporate VC is easier on valuation. Actually, they don't really care if they pay a little bit more upfront. Why? Because they're looking to the exit, meaning whether they're not solely or mainly concerned with their return, financial return. So therefore, they're willing to pay a little higher valuation now because what they're mainly trying to do is figure out, do we want to buy the rest of this company? And if we do buy the rest of this company, they want to buy as cheaply as possible. And like you said, because they're inside the company, they will actually know what's the cheapest possible price that we can pay for this company. And along with that, okay, corporate VCs, do they want you to sell to the highest bidder? No. They, especially if the highest bidder is a competitor of theirs. So so oftentimes corporate VCs will include in their investment agreements that you can't sell to a competitor or that they have to approve whoever you sell to. Now, financial VCs may also want approval of sale, but financial VCs will almost always only want to sell to the highest possible bidder. So there is a fundamental misalignment between the interests of corporate VCs and strategic investors and startups. This doesn't mean that they're not potentially very valuable and a source of funding and cannot be good investors, which they can. But we have to be very careful in our agreements with corporate VCs and strategic investors to make sure that our interests are aligned in the investment agreement. Another risk that we run with corporate VCs and investors is something I call like creeping acquisition strategy. So corporate investor invests in the company, and then as you raise more money, they buy more and more of the company until they reach a controlling stake without actually buying out management. And again, this is something that financial VCs never want to do. Like, why would we ever want to do that? Because we don't make any money that way. But corporate VCs who are mainly looking for strategic value might be happy with that. Meaning, let's say they achieve like a 30 or 40% stake, so pretty much guaranteeing that you can never sell to anybody else, but they also will never want to buy the company because they now control the company and effectively control. They get the strategic benefit without having to pay for the rest of the company. So these are real risks that you have to watch out for in your agreements with corporate VCs and strategic investors. Not that you should ignore or turn them away, because they are increasingly important players at the early stage, but you have to be extremely careful about what are the rates given up in your investment agreements. And also, some corporate VCs have been known to use investments in startups to get information about the startup that helps them in their own business, which again, financial VCs almost never want to do. Because why? I'm not in the same business as you, so getting information from you doesn't necessarily help me at all. But if I'm in the same business as you, this could be another risk with corporate VC. Okay.
Another question that might be relevant to that. Would financial VC invest into competing companies?
So, okay, normally financial VCs will not invest in the same fund into companies that are directly competing. So again, to avoid this type of conflict. But this is something you want to ask about, if you're getting investment from any VC. So, okay, next, after corporate VCs, angel investors. I differentiate angel investors from venture capital investors by the source of their funds. So angel investor, and there's some, gray areas and edge cases again, but basically to me, angel investor is someone investing their own money. A venture capital investor is somebody investing other people's money. Now, venture capital investors may have some of their own money in the fund. Angel investors may sometimes have angel funds that combine money from different angels, in which case they look more like VCs. But just for purposes of comparing these two types of investor, we'll say that the basic difference is angel investors are investing their own money and VCs are investing other people's money. Also, typically different angel investors will likely want to be more involved in your business, and they may also be more flexible on terms and valuation, where venture capital investors will want preferred shares and will be pretty strict about the terms of the investment. Angel investors might take ordinary shares, and they might be pretty flexible on terms of investment. So typically, angel investors invest smaller amounts than venture capital funds, although some angel investors can invest very large amounts. So angel investors' valuation may be more favorable. They might be hands-on and able to help the business. Terms may be easier. So this all sounds really good, and it is potentially good. But what are some of the risks in angel investors?
Yeah, angels.
So one thing is, anybody can call themselves an angel investor. Now, of course, anybody can call themselves a venture capital investor too, but typically the venture capital investor is a company, and therefore there's more information about that company, and venture capital investors may be regulated, where angel investors are not. So it's general case that a credible venture capital fund will be easier to find than credible angel. But what are other risks in angel investors?
Based on intuition and the active influence to invest.
Say it again.
The actual investor maybe sometimes invest based on their feelings
Oh.
their intuition.
Yeah. So they might be more like emotion driven.
Emotion. Then it affects it.
Yeah, that can be a plus or minus. And
It happens to VC sometimes.
yeah, so what about, okay, the fact that the angel investor wants to help you personally,
Yeah.
is it a plus or minus?
It's plus.
It's both.
It can be a plus or minus. It depends on like how much do they want to help and how involved do they want to be, and how much do they how do they define help? Like maybe you didn't realize that meant they wanted to sit in the office all day and look over your shoulder and question every decision that you're making and ask you why you're doing it and have you justify. And, so some angel investors might want to be too involved, and that might not be comfortable for some entrepreneurs. And another, both, there's two sides to every coin. And then angel investors also, we want to look at the credibility issue. So, like, we had a situation with one of our companies that we invested in last year, where the company raised a follow-on round from a group of like 8 angel investors, and everybody signed agreements. But then when it came time to draw down money, one of the angel investors said they had some financial problem and they couldn't make the whole commitment. So they asked, can they, just pay part now and pay part later? And so the company agreed, but actually the later never came. So then there was a big problem with this investment, and how do you solve that problem? So the general issue here is angel investors, because they're not companies with a reputation necessarily to uphold, they might do things that venture capital investors would never do. Because if you're a venture capital fund and you make a commitment to a company and then you fail to supply the money, like when it comes time to pay, you're not going to get any more deals. So venture capital investors have a much higher bar to get over than angel investors. Also, sometimes angel investors, they may or may not take the investment totally seriously. Like getting them to sign things can take a long time. We've seen that with some of our angel investments. And I had one other example of a company that raised a follow-on funding round from an angel investor who delivered the first tranche of the investment, but then was working in the company.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. So, and because they're investing their own money, they also might make decisions that are not the same type of decision that a venture capital investor would make. And again, that could be good or bad. Okay, so seed investors and incubators or accelerators. So incubators and accelerators are another very important form of funding for startup companies, especially accelerators and incubators that provide investment as part of the service that they provide to the company. These can have some very important benefits for the companies because investors that work through programs like this also help the companies to grow in a way that regular venture capital funds may or may not. So this is one way that startup companies get in front of credible investors, and also get to, it helps them accelerate the fundraising after they go through the accelerator incubator program, which probably you're all pretty familiar with because you're already in the accelerator program. And then venture capital investors. So here I'm using venture capital investors to mean financial investors who are venture capital funds that are specifically set up to invest in startup companies. And this is the traditional VC that I talk about throughout the program. So I think there are pluses and minuses to all investors. Venture capital investors will typically have the most stringent terms, so they usually be the most sticky on valuation, and they'll require preferred shares, and they'll have very clear limitations in the agreement as to what the company can do with the money, etc. But so that's the downside. The upside is that getting investment from a venture capital fund, actually every company that wants to grow to significant size will ultimately have to get investment from a venture capital fund, because that's the only funding source out of all the ones we talked about that will have enough money to take the company through various stages to exit. So the sooner the company gets investment from a credible venture capital fund, the easier the subsequent fundraising becomes. Because why? Because venture capital funds venture capital funds prefer to invest in companies in which other venture capital funds have already invested. And this is sort of a circularity problem, but one way to break out of that is to get investment early from a credible venture capital fund. And when I say credible, so different venture capital funds also have different, occupy different places in the market or industry landscape, which can have a pretty big impact on how the company is perceived by next round venture capital investors. Okay, so any questions about this? I guess this leaves open the question of which is the best? Which is the best investor, best type of investor to get money from?
VCs along with CVC.
Based on the which stage?
Yeah, let's say at the early stage. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no right answer. You know, most companies will get investments from more than one type of investor. So I think the key thing is to make sure that you understand pluses and minuses of each investor and that you're carefully selecting the right mix of investors. So another thing to think about is the mix of investors in your company. So the way that the investor is going to work together and the synergy among the investors. So.
What do we need to look for in terms of synergy between investors?
Like, let's say, oh, okay, do I want 2 corporate VCs? Probably I don't, you know what I mean? Like, let's say I have 2 corporate VCs. Now, all the challenges that I'm going to have with corporate VC are doubled, because now I have to worry about 2 companies having a misalignment of interest with me, and any restrictions that come from one company are also going to be probably replicated by the other company, and pretty soon the tidal forces of having 2 corporate investors can like tear the company apart. Or do I want to have, you know, do I want to have like 5 angel investors? And again, this is this happens sometimes, can be challenging. Do I want to have maybe a mix or balance of investors? So if I'm going to have a corporate VC, then I might want to have a financial VC also to balance the corporate VC. If I have some investment from angel investors, I might want to get a corporate VC again to come in and balance that. So
What if you have angel first and then raise money from VCs and then want to exit part of the angel investment to other VCs?
So this, yeah, I mean, this happens a lot where the company would raise money first from angel investors, because angel investors are usually looking at the first stage, and then subsequently they raise money from venture capital investors. Now, whether the incoming venture capital investors are going to want to buy out the angel investors or either part or all of the initial angel investor stake depends a lot on the circumstance. The default case is usually no, especially if it's just first to second stage. Meaning, let's say you got some angel investment and then the seed stage VC came in, they're almost never going to want to buy out the angels because there won't be enough money to go around. Like, you know, let's say the angel investors put in 150,000 and the new investors coming in for 500,000. So they're definitely not going to want to use the guys that put in 150. They're not going to go out for 150 because they want to make some return. So let's say they're willing to go out for 200 at least. Yeah, at least, and or even 300. You know, but then 300 of my 500 goes to pay angel investors. It's not interesting. So we do see sometimes early investors or prior investors will get bought out by subsequent round investors. This definitely happens, and it doesn't usually happen in between the first and second round. This would usually happen like when we get to, let's say we got to a Series A or Series B, and there's angel investors that are still in. Now the incoming investors might want to buy some or all of their shares. Why would, because now the amounts might make sense. So let's say an angel investor that put in 50,000 is willing to go out for 150,000 in a $3 million round. Now the 150 that we're paying him may make sense, given the right circumstance. what is the right circumstance? So right circumstance can be a couple of different situations. One is something we call messy cap table. It's a messy cap table. Clean up, or we call cleaning up the cap table. So one situation that can often, or that arises sometimes with startups, the startup raises too much money from, or it raises money from too many individual investors early in the fundraising cycle. So we see companies sometimes come in with like 18 angels or more, 30 investors, who put in $10,000 each and they get $300,000. And now the cap table, we call this very messy cap table. Because why? There's way too many small investors. This can be a problem just for compliance, like for example, some things that you do with the company may require a signature of all shareholders. Now you're chasing 30 shareholders, and who knows where they are, and they don't respond to email, and every document is being held up while we chase them. And, yeah,
they have a big investors.
So one solution is we might clean up the cap table by moving small investors into, we call an SPV, single purpose vehicle, which is a new company that gets set up just to house these investments, and then that SPV is represented in the startup by one shareholder, and then one person is authorized to sign on their behalf. So that can be one way to clean up. Another way to clean up is buyout. If we want to buy out, you might, incoming investors might want to buy out a troublesome early shareholder, somebody that's a problem or that you don't want anymore. Sometimes subsequent round incoming investors might buy out existing shareholders in order to average down the cost of their investment. So let's say, for example, the new shares are being sold at, $50. The angel investors bought their shares at $1. They're willing to go out at $20 because they get a 20x return, but this is still 40% of the current price. So an incoming investor might buy out some angels in order to average down the cost of their shares. That happens sometimes too. So yeah, so that's how that works. This is just looking at some of the what I would call the interest alignment between entrepreneurs and investors. And you can see here it's pretty good. So entrepreneurs create opportunities. Investors are looking to identify opportunities. Entrepreneurs raise money. Investors provide money. Entrepreneurs manage finance. Investors oversee. Entrepreneurs want to increase value. Venture investors want to help them do that. And entrepreneurs want to generate returns for investors, and venture investors want to generate returns for themselves or their investors. So this is a pretty nice alignment of interest. Although I talked about one situation where this doesn't always hold true, which is in the case of corporate or strategic VCs, where there's other interests besides the ones that I put on the right-hand side. And later, when we look at the key terms of venture finance agreements, we're going to look at other situations where this alignment of interest can become misaligned, even between financial VCs and startups. So I think I want to stop at this point. I have one more slide, a couple more things to talk about, but I want to pick these up tomorrow because they're going to take a little while to discuss. So any questions about what we talked about so far?
So stay for tomorrow.
That's it? Yeah, we'll save the rest of the slide for.
Maybe save all the questions for tomorrow also.
Oh, you can still ask questions now.
Just kidding.
Oh.
One operational question. For the rest of the course, can we report all the?
Oh, I recorded already.
Oh, you recorded.
Yeah, everything is recorded. All the previous lectures are recorded, and I'm recording this one also.
When are you guys going to put it up?
So, I didn't upload the previous two So I'll just do all at once. Any other questions?
Normally, for example, okay, it's not example. For example, if we graduated from this class and we got the deal with investor, so